Welcome to the Birth Neoterist space. I'm your host, Sabia, coming to you in the spirit of been away for 2 months, acclimating back to the US. Um, and just moving through. But I'm happy to have the guest that we have today, who is a current teacher of mine that I really appreciate and the time that we spent together. And I'm super excited to spend even more time one-on-one with you. Okay. So if you can introduce yourself in the ways that feel good to you today.
Hmm. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to spend more one-on-one time with you as well. I am showing up as I often do these days, just a little raggedy,
Me too.
a little tired, a little heartsick, a little sad, and still hopeful, still grounded, still connected. My name is Marchaé Greer. I use they or she pronouns. My image description, for those for which it would be helpful, is that I'm wearing a dark turtleneck. I'm sitting in a chair in front of many, many books. I'm a brown skinned person with large new glasses. And my hair is back in a bun. I am Pauline's granddaughter. I'm a former Pentecostal who loves gospel music still. I am embodied and charismatic because that's my lineage. I can pray quietly or extemporaneously. I am a dog mom. I am a partner and a spouse. I'm a bestie. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I am still finding my way. I'm queer and polyamorous and Black, disabled, anxious all the time, and
Yes.
and happy to be here. That's me.
I feel I feel closer already. Okay. Where do I start? Okay. One, clap for the gospel music because I was unpacking. I'm in my room right now and I was unpacking and I had my gospel music on because I was like, I just need the spirit. I just need the thing. Like gospel music, like I identify as like heavily Buddhist, like a mix of like African spirituality and like whatever else I put in there. But like gospel music, like it just it just does something to me.
Yes, it does.
Like,
It's like there's no replacement for it.
there's no replacement for it. And I think sometimes people are surprised, like, and we'll get into like your work specifically. Also, y'all, my lighting is gonna be in and out, but like I need this sun and I'm also dark skinned and we're gonna just flow. Um, like, but like it's just something about gospel music that like, and my family also, like I come from a family of gospel singers and like I'm not one of them. Like I can't really I hit the notes, but I don't hit them as well
Not doing the
as they
run.
do. Yeah, yeah. So I also feel like it's so like tightly like wound to my like lineage of like musicians and gospel music just always being around. And being, you said you were Pentecostal before?
Yes, for those who are familiar, I grew up Church of God in Christ, lovingly known as Kojic. Yes.
Okay, well, can we get into your work identities? However you want to name them, but leading into the work that you're teaching to me right now, if you will.
Yes, I would love to. I would love to say that, you know, from birth, I was like, I know what I'll be doing at 35. Bless the people that do know that. But a lot of my current work feels like divine coincidence, divine accident. My training is actually in journalism. Many moons ago, I went to journalism school. in Ohio, where I'm from. I'm a proud Midwesterner, even though I currently live on the East Coast. And I was working at the time, my first office job was a small indie erotic romance publisher. And that is its own story. That's another happy accident. But my time was done at that place, and I was looking for another job and ended up finding a job at the headquarters of the United Church of Christ. And at the time, I thought I was done with religion. Coming out as queer was complicated. There were a lot of painful moments that had
Hmm.
to do with spiritual and religious community. And I felt pretty disgusted. I felt pretty isolated. And the job just called to me. And so I ended up working at the United Church of Christ as a social media manager and on the communications team. And I really fell in love with the idea of making my own way. I ended up on a writing team that still exists called the Still Speaking Writers Group, writing spiritual resources. And I was the only person, at least I was one of the only people who was not a minister who was on that writing team. And so I feel like there are lots of little stories from then until now where I just always ended up in the room and I'm like, how am I here? I'm not I'm not the ordained one. I'm not the minister. I didn't grow up with this tradition. And yet I still end up in some place. And so it was my time was done at that job. And again, there is something to be said about just knowing when time is up, when it's just time to leave. And as I
Hmm.
grow in my career and I grow in myself, I'm getting more comfortable with just naming those moments. Like my time here is done. So I ended up moving into work with Unitarian Universalists, and I worked at the headquarters of the Unitarian Universalist Association, again, doing communications work. And that parlayed into an opportunity with the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists, where I still do communications work. All the while in the background, I was feeling as if there was more to be done within the spiritual space that was probably beyond me, editing websites and doing
Hmm.
communications. That kind of stuff is really important. And it just didn't feel like all that I had to say or do. And so I Googled a search for spirituality and social justice. That's all I Googled. I kept it simple. Like, I really want to do something that honors my commitment to both. And I'm on the East Coast, and a program that was in person at the time came up for spiritual direction. And the organization was called Still Harbor. And there was this skill that they were teaching called spiritual direction that I had heard only one other time I had heard the phrase spiritual direction. A friend of mine was talking about spiritual direction just when we were hanging out one day. A group of us were hanging out. That person is now my current co-teacher, who you know as Molly,
Yes,
Molly Bolton.
Molly.
And so spiritual direction ended up being something I came into by a lot of happy accidents. And when people ask me what spiritual direction is, I say many things. I think the thing I'll say now is that it's really about holding holy sacred space, because that is something that so many of us don't have access to. We don't have access to
Hmm.
spaces where we're invited to show up, but without some kind of outcome attached. And that
Hmm.
invitation is really holy. That invitation is really spacious. And it really is a particular kind of care work that I'm really proud of doing and proud of teaching.
It's been, as a student, it's been an amazing experience in so many ways. Still Harbor as an organization and what Still Harbor stands for, actually being in space has been really helpful. I think, like one, I love the way that the space is held, that like we just have like time. And like I know like I'm never on screen until we do like until we do like our affinity groups. But for me, it's like for work, I'm always on screen. So when I'm like, oh, I don't have to be on screen, I'm like, turn it off. Like, but there's no judgment. There's no, it's always a vibe, I feel like, in this space. Um, and I would say for me, like spiritual direction was something I had never heard of. I never heard of spiritual direction until I was in my CPE course, which for people that don't know, that's a course that you take to study chaplaincy. You're like studying chaplaincy at the same time of like practicing. And so I was in that course earlier this year with Malu, who I did another podcast with, and I liked the idea of chaplaincy, right? Because I want to help and I want to assist, and I think naturally as a doula, there's some connection to that, right? Like providing that holistic care. And I was like, okay, chaplaincy, especially like doing death work and all sorts of stuff. But then also the CPE structure just wasn't a structure that I feel like worked for me. Um, and I also think chaplaincy in itself is great, but it's just a whole nother, it's just a whole thing. It's just a whole thing. When we gonna get into that. But like, but then Mark, one of the who's actually a Pentecostal pastor, Reverend Pastor, what do Pentecostal people use?
He could be both.
Okay, either or. Okay. Like, but Mark, like, he actually was like, oh yeah, there's this organization called Still Harbor, like spiritual direction. I'm like, hmm. And then I talked to Chaplain Jessica Chang, who went through your program before, and she was the one who posted about you all like opening up for enrollment and like whatever applications. And so I looked into it and I was like, okay, queer, okay, trans, okay, inclusive, okay, liberation. Wait a minute. Wait, wait, and it also like I think too, like sometimes I mean, and I say this in the doula realm, right? Like sometimes you feel there's people who are capable of doing this work, who are in alignment with doing this work, who are meant to do this work, but the red tape is just so much red tape that you're like, how the fuck am I ever going to get to this end point, right? Like how am I ever going to get there? And I felt like spiritual direction also created a pathway that was accessible. And because of the way y'all set it up and the cost y'all make it and like all that, to like doing like holding sacred space for people, especially people in movement work, people who don't always feel safe in a church environment, but they also want to be in some type of community and want to be seen in that way without judgment. And like, yeah, I can't say enough about like about all the things that Still Harbor is, but also the great teacher that you are. So I would love to like learn about in this like in your own journey, especially me being a Black non-binary woman myself, queer woman, it's just a special relationship with religion, Blackness, and being queer. Like, and I would love to kind of if you like to like just speak to that journey, but also like how you found yourself able to put these things back together.
Hmm. Thank you for that thoughtful question and for all of the, shout outs and compliments that were layered in that response. I'm really grateful. Um, part of this particular moment in my life, I think that I'm lucky that parts of my queerness, not all of it, for example, not my gender queerness, but parts of my queerness came to my awareness early in life. By early, I mean in high school. And so a lot of the fear, a lot of the rejection, a lot of the pain that can come in being newly queer happened for
Mhm.
me. I mean, I look back on my younger self and I feel a lot of deep compassion and sadness for all that I had to go through. And now that I'm in my mid 30s, I feel like I have lived many lives, many queer lives. because of so much that happened to me early on. And all of that to say is one of the key differences between queer me then and queer me now is that I realized that I don't have to denounce or reject all of my lineage in order to be authentically queer. And I grew
Mm-hmm.
up Pentecostal, and the gospel songs that my aunt taught me in on the worship team belong to me just as much as they belong to the person who says I'm going to hell because I'm queer or trans. No one
Mm-hmm.
can take that from me, and I don't have to. If I am part of a spiritual community that doesn't accept me, no, it's not safe for me to be there. And my lineage is not about the people who don't accept me. My lineage is about where I came from and how I know to understand my most spiritual core self and being. And that is not the same as looking for permission from some people to ordain me, for some people to say that I can sing in the choir, etc. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm really grateful that I've been able to create some separation between what a person tells me and what spirit tells me.
Mm-hmm.
Because in my lineage, in my Pentecostal lineage, I still hear from spirit within some of the practices that were given to me as a child, that were given to me as a teen. No, I'm not going to be in a church that says I can't be there. I don't want to be there.
That part.
Also, and also, I'm allowed to claim what is mine within that lineage. And I think part of the part of the spiritual discontent, lack of clarity within Black queerness can be thinking that you can't hold on to any tradition if people within that tradition say you can't be there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
is false.
Yeah, I feel that 1000%, right? Because I think even what you're speaking to, like, and what I hear just like on the spiritual level, because I'm also 35, right? Like we're very, very, we're at a very similar time in our life, right? So like, but I just hear your journey of sitting with your identity, sitting with your lineage, sitting with, the practices that you have taken, the practices that you left behind, um, and how you've pulled that like ancestry story and that lineage story into your own story going forward. And I think like that's also a part of spiritual direction is kind of like, okay, how do we come into this space? How do I pull these pieces of myself? The pieces that may be like the happy pieces, the sad pieces, the traumatized pieces, like, but how do I don't know, I think it's just something beautiful about being able to claim those pieces and still create the story that you want to create for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I think like when you're not living the life that some people want you to live in a certain religion or whatever, you start to feel like you just can't create your own story. It starts to feel like your story has to look like this person or it has to align with that or it has to be accepted by this person or this thing. And I think especially for, Black and brown folks, indigenous folks, fucking queer, trans folks, is like my story is just not going to be that because I'm not I'm just not that, right? So like how do I make this thing, create my own story, but also become okay with it, right? Like how do I have this acceptance around, yeah, like my family was very much a Baptist family. And of course, that has its own ideas and whatever. But like a bitch loves gospel music. Like I'm gonna play that. Like if I feel low, baby, I'm gonna turn up some gospel music. Like, but that's mine. It's my thing, right? And the person next to me that hears me listening to it might be like you, like queer, black, abortion supporting this whatever things that they deem me as. Like you listening, yes, baby. People never put more on me than I can bear. Yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Like, so it's just like putting those things together, I think, I don't know, it just speaks to the work that you teach and just like the experience of spiritual direction. So I have a question. In this process of like finding yourself, I mean, like your own self and the work that you do, what has been your biggest challenge or challenges?
I would say one of my biggest challenges has been how the even folks who identify as progressive or spiritually open still haven't done their own self-reflection work about how to uplift the leadership of many of the people who hold my identities. So I think, for example, white progressive folks who are spiritual, who denounce racism, still don't always realize the ways that they undermine Black leadership. I think that coming into leadership even relatively young, at this point, I've been the PR director of an entire faith denomination. and I'm and that's a past job. That's not even my
Mm-hmm.
present job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So people realizing that they may have bias against young leadership. Folks who
Young
assume,
and
yeah,
young and black. Yes.
um, people who don't realize that there's a difference between empowering your leadership and exercising ideas of like tolerance. Because it's actually not enough for someone to say that they believe in my leadership or to say they're anti-racist or to say that they are queer and trans affirming, et cetera, et cetera. I want to know what that embodied relational experience of that is going to be. I want to
Mm-hmm.
be able to give an assignment or write a syllabus and not get 20 questions that my white peers wouldn't get. I want to not have people. I remember when I worked at one job and someone asked me to go to lunch. And when I first started that job, and they asked me where I went to college, and I told them, and they're like, "Oh, you went to a state school? I'm so surprised." So even people who are quote unquote on the right side of history still have this idea about what it means to be a leader. So if I start my class and I'm playing like the new Kalani music, it doesn't mean I don't know my shit. Like let's not get confused.
Mm-hmm.
Like let's not get
Mm-hmm.
confused
Mm-hmm.
about me actually having done the work of working through respectability and saying sometimes I'm going to teach in a sweatshirt, sometimes I'm going to play R&B music, and sometimes I'm going to cuss, and sometimes I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to quote the movie I watched last night because I know within my authenticity and I know within my experience that I am still wise and I am still holy. And if that
That
makes you
part.
uncomfortable, that's a you problem. But a lot of the folks who are still on the quote unquote left have don't realize that they have that issue.
You saying something because I mean it's such, and I think like that's the hardship, like and the work that you do specifically in like the spirituality like field sector. I don't know if you want to call it that, and like specifically like, but you also do a lot of your work also intersects with like activism for sure. But like I'm definitely like, in the activism like space. Um, and I think that's just like it's like people who who are aiming to do the right thing, who are aiming to be on the right side, whatever, like there's still a lot of detoxing that needs to be done. There's still a lot of self-reflection that needs to be done ongoingly. Like you can't just say like I commit to anti-racism, but not question yourself every day or reflect on your actions every day. And not question your thoughts, right? Like around why do I have this thought when this person, like, why do I feel the need to question something when this person speaks? Right? Like, what is my perception of what's the right way to do something and who is that based on? What imagery do I get of who is the right person or the right way or whatever to be done? And I think it's like, I see it in your work for sure. It's like to invite even in spiritual direction, I would assume like to invite if the goal is to make spiritual direction as diverse as possible, as accessible as possible, to make sure that spiritual directors are reflecting the identities of their directees, like that means we have to do shit different.
Mm-hmm.
And the ways that you're doing it, like when you're talking about like listening to Kalani and like doing these things, it's like that's the difference that makes a difference, right? Like, and when people question it, it's, I guess, like, how does it make you feel? Because I know how it makes me feel because people question my leadership all the time. But I just wonder, like, what words would you use to describe how it makes you feel?
Well, I would love to hear your answer. Um, I will say for me, I feel, I think I feel dismissed. I feel demoralized because how much work do I have to do to prove that I'm worthy of respect, especially respect that would just be given to a majority,
Mediocre. Yeah.
mediocre person who holds the majority identities.
hmm
It makes me feel at my core pissed off.
hmm
It's why it's really important to have a community of care and accountability around you as a spiritual teacher, because the first feeling that you have is not the first reaction you can have. But it makes me pissed off. And it makes me have
hmm
a lot of grief because at the end of the day, and this is the part that feels like the work that has taken me the longest to do, is to realize that these things are ultimately not about me. A lot of, at the end of the day, I could ask myself,
hmm
what could I do differently to get this person to respect me, to get this person to not show up in a way that undermines all of the work and study I do? And the answer
hmm
is I I could not do anything to prove I'm worthy. Because if someone is not committed to doing the self-reflection work about how they show up, there's nothing I can do to change that. And that to me is something that I have deep grief about because ultimately that is what it takes for our movements to be transformed. Is for us to not
Yes.
always declare that someone else is being unjust, but to turn the finger in and being like, actually, I could have showed up a lot differently.
hmm
If
Yes.
no one in if no one in these progressive spaces is doing that work, then what hope do we really have? And that brings me grief.
So much. And I think like all the words that you said, all the feelings that you said, definitely. And I think for me, like being being a leader, like in the space that I'm in, and like you said in class the other day, like if you're becoming a spiritual director, you're becoming a spiritual leader. And I was like, leadership is not new to me, right? But being specific in this specific area will be new to me. But I was like, I hold a lot of grief around the the hours and days where I question myself. Like, and it's not like just like the regular self-analysis, right? It's like, could I have done that better? Like, of course I'm asking myself that. Like, I'm asking my friends, like, this is how I handle the situation. Could I have done it better, right? but more so the times where it was just like excessive, right? Where like that thing got to me or that person got to me or like not being respected, like made me think like there has to be something that I did that would make this person be this way. Like there just has to be. So I think like just that grief, how much time I used to spend in that space, um, just to come out of it, like, bro, it's nothing that you could have done. Like, there's nothing that you could have done. There's nothing that you could have did. You would just have to be a completely different person. And so since that's not going to be the case, there's nothing that you can do. So this whole grief over like those like and for me, like my anxiety manifests is very like somatic. So just like the times where I'm like, I know that I'm in pain right now physically because my heart is in pain
Mm.
because I wanted to be respected. I wanted to be cared for, right? Like I wanted to be in camaraderie. I just wanted that experience, and that's just not the one that I got for no reason other than me being myself. So yeah, like just those like moments of, and also like then you get pissed off, right? Or at least for me, then I get pissed. Like, now as like a person who's like specifically been leading space throughout like the last 5, 6 years and still being questioned, still being tried, you know what I mean? Now I just go into like, I'm just like, like win some, lose some. I'm not for everybody. Like it's cool. And that's like something that helps me move through. But yeah, we just have a lot of similarities on being in these spaces. And but also like you said, like or like what I felt was still finding hope in the people that are like, yo, you did some really good shit. Or the people that you inspire, or the people that you support, or the people that can just be so transparent with you in a way that they can't be in other spaces, or just like the people where you're like, I held space for you, you also held space for me. Like that just makes it all the much more better. So I have two more questions for you.
Mm.
One is when we're talking about spiritual direction specifically, what, and you can just use your imagination. It doesn't have to be based on any current factors, but what do you, what is your hope for the future of spiritual direction?
My hope for this future of spiritual direction is that people will know that it's available to them. I think a lot of people are looking for what spiritual direction provides, and they often
Mm-hmm.
don't know that it exists until they meet a spiritual director.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because
um,
I've been chilling with my spiritual director today, a soul vibe. I was like, I was just at a a meditation with her last night in a group, and I was like, community. Yes, this is like what I've been looking for, but I didn't know that it was called this.
mhm. Spiritual direction is ultimately about having a person that you can trust to unpack spiritual themes in your life, spiritual trauma, spiritual triumphs, transitioning of spiritual identity and traditions, and making meaning of things in the world that are hard from a spiritual perspective. That's something that so many people are longing for, and they just don't have the language to know who or what
Mhm,
to look for. So, my hope would be, especially for people in movement work, people of color, Black people specifically, queer and trans folks, disabled folks, folks who are like throwing down in like protests and actions, and just the people who are my community. That's why I do this work. It's like because I want those folks to be served. I mean, to be honest, white spiritual directors have had the most space, most platforming. I care about white folks in my community, and I know that they will ultimately be served.
mhm,
In the
mhm,
future, I would love if I were teaching a spiritual direction practicum and it was all Black students.
Mm-hmm.
Like that would be my ultimate dream because I do this work not just for myself but for my communities and ultimately because I feel like it's in tribute to my lineage and my ancestors. I think of some of the last conversations I had with my grandmother at the end of her life, and they were conversations she hadn't had with anybody before, and she died in her 70s. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
what would it have looked like if somebody would have been there to listen to her and not judged her? Like, what would that have freed in her? And so
Mm-hmm.
to me, the future is like a future where that past version of my grandma could be free, where I could be free, where future people who are like us can be free.
For sure. Yes. I'm telling you now, I'm gonna help with that all black situation. Yeah. 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 Like when you said it, I was like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So my last question for you is in all of this, in all of the care that you provide as a spiritual practitioner, as a teacher, as a spouse, as a daughter, as a bestie, like it's like all these identities, how are you caring for yourself?
Mm, I love this question. What a beautiful, beautiful way to end, and what a beautiful call into accountability. Because if someone is teaching something, they better be doing it. That's what I always tell people. Um, I have my own care practitioners. I have a spiritual director um, who is a wonderful Black woman who just, when I talk to her, I just feel at home. I have a therapist who really understands core parts of my identity that I feel like haven't been understood for maybe my entire life.
Mhm.
I am in a phase of my life where I'm looking at desire and passion really holistically and looking beyond romance, looking beyond quick thrills and saying like ultimately what are the desires of my heart for my life. And writing is one of my first loves and it's one of my forever loves. And so I'm really taking time to write right now and making that time incredibly sacred, making sure that people in my life know that it's a priority and what supporting that priority looks like. And I'll be in a writing workshop next month for Roots, Wounds, and Words for storytellers of color as a writing fellow. And also taking care of myself looks like releasing attachments to outcomes without without losing attachment to intentions. Because there's a lot in
Mhm.
life that I cannot control. There's a lot in life that if I try to be hyper vigilant in exerting myself, I'm going to burn out. But that doesn't mean that I can't show up a certain way, that I can't be clear about who I want to be in the world, and that that won't be enough. And so I'm really trying to ground in that difference because I spent a lot of my life overworking, and it's something I'm determined not to do in this second part of my life.
Are we the same person or because it's literally my theme for 2024 because like 2023 was like a metamorphosis year because I had like put out my first book, did a bunch of like book events and like was able to see like how my work is impacting people like in real life in real time. And I just felt like it was like me kind of like get like being able to see the fruits of my labor, right? And then this year, like your whole thing you just said, I'm like, bro, I just joined Sister Scribe, which is like an online community for writers, for Black writers. Um, just like accountability, community, like being in the space with more writers. Um, I'm also going to go to this like little writing retreat in Greece later on in the
Yeah.
year. And like, but yeah, I'm like literally, I told my theme of this year is like living the life of an artist.
Mm,
Cause I was like, I just want to like write, travel. I want to do the things I got to do to sustain my life and my team, whatever. Like bills have to be paid, salaries have to be sent out, but but it's like, yeah, like when you said that desire and passion part, it's like, yeah, like what? And I don't know if it's like the good year of 35. I don't know if it's just like the time in the world we're at where there's so much like, there's so many atrocities happening where you have to kind of center in and be like, okay, one, how do I do my work for my community? But also, how do I center my desires and my passions? Because those are the things that are going to maintain hope, right? And if I have hope, then I have a way of continuing to help my community, but also continuing to help myself. And I think like as an overworker, as like as like a high achieving type of person, it can be so easy to like lose track of yourself
mhm,
because you're doing meaningful work, right? But it's like, what about me?
mhm.
So I guess we'll be figuring that out, huh? Won't we?
What about,
Um,
yeah,
look at this dog.
that dog is so cute. Hi, buddy.
I have to get their ears re-dyed. Their ears were like, well, his ears were blue. Wait, hold on. I can't. Okay, you can see some of it. Wait, come on. If his ears were blue and
I
his
can.
tail was blue, and then this dog was green. So they live a high life. You know how it is. Um, but how do people reach out to you, contact you, learn more about you?
People can find me on my website, which is marchaé.com. People can find me at Marchaé Greer on Instagram. I have been slowly making my way to being online more, but because of some of the things I've needed to figure out in the last couple years, it's meant a much quieter presence online and more time just being with myself and being offline. But if you write, I'll still respond. I find my way back.
Listen, no, online, that's just a whole nother job. Like, luckily, my team helps me with that because there's only so much that we can do as people. Like, there's only so much that I can literally energetically do. And it's not like 10 years ago where it's like you just throw up an Instagram post and put a picture and it's gone. It's like, what's the caption? What's the hashtags? What's this? How does this move? I don't beyond me, baby. Beyond me. I just want to do my work, bro. I just want to sit behind my computer, do my little work, put it out to the world, and that's it. Jesus. Well, so stressful. Like you just think back to the time where like, especially like being like people who have businesses and stuff like that, like saying it was easy for them because I'm sure it wasn't, but it's just so many elements. Because it's not like it's just one social network. It's like a million and five. So you're like, which do you go on to TikTok and do it? Do you go to Instagram and do it? Do you go on Facebook? Do you go on some other new thing that we're too old to know about at 35? Like what? You put a reel? Do you make a picture? Do you make a video? Do you put it in your story? Do you put it in the like?
I'm just naive. I'm naive enough to believe if you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing, and by supposed to, I mean the work that your heart longs to do.
Mhm.
And if you're doing that work well and within community and accountability, people will find you. And so for the folks who don't have lots of time or lots of teams, I would say start small, start in the places that make you smile.
And
And that,
start with people. Just
yeah,
start with people.
start with relationships.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
really, social media is a way to have different kinds of relationships. So just start there and you'll be just fine.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate all of this, all the things that you said, the work that you continue to do, the work that the teaching and learning that I get to do in space with you and Molly. Yeah, I just appreciate you.
I appreciate you too for doing such wonderful work in the world and showing up as yourself. It is lovely to be in space with you exactly as you come, and I look forward to getting to know you more.